Welcome to NewYorkBIO's Patient Engagement Summit, an annual event bringing together patients, advocacy groups, life science and biotechnology leaders. This panel is focused on decentralizing clinical trials, featuring Jordyne Blaise from Circuit Clinical, Alicia Staley from Medidata, Yihenew Abetu from SUNY Downstate, and Courtney Mann from the Foundation for Sarcoidosis, thankfully sponsored by Circuit Clinical.
Good morning to everyone joining us from the East Coast, and good day to those joining us worldwide. Thank you for being here with us today, and thank you so much to the NewYorkBIO team for allowing myself to host and play moderator for today's panel. If you're wondering where you are and haven't had your coffee yet, you are in the Decentralizing Clinical Trials panel. I welcome you warmly. My name is Jordyne Blaise, and I am the Vice President of Equity and Community Engagement at Circuit Clinical, where I am in charge of engaging patients in the community and increasing access to clinical research across the universe, really. So that being said, there's plenty about me. I would love to open it up to introduce our panelists. We're joined by a powerhouse group of incredible thinkers across the industry and in the patient community. And I would love to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And today we're joined by Alicia Staley, Courtney Mann, Yihenew Abetu, and I would love for each of you to share a little bit about where you're from, what you do, and I always think this is the most important question. Share with us your why. What inspires you to do the work that you're doing? And I'll start with Alicia.
Good morning, Jordyne. Thanks so much for the warm welcome. My name is Alicia Staley. I'm the VP of Patient Engagement at Medidata. And I am just really all in on decentralized clinical trials and trying to change the patient perspective in clinical research. My why I do this, I'm a 3-time cancer survivor. I've had my own experiences with clinical research. My background is in engineering and information systems. And I think over the years as a patient, I was becoming increasingly frustrated with the amount of time I was spending in waiting rooms and dealing with inefficiencies in my own healthcare journey. And I guess you can't put an engineer in a waiting room and not expect them to try to fix it. So my why is about changing what clinical research looks like for the patient. So if I can use my experience to make it better, that's why I do what I do. I don't want people to have to go through some of the stuff that I did to deal with cancer. And I have an opportunity to do that with my work at Medidata, and I'm extraordinarily grateful for it. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Erica?
Thank you so much for having me in this opportunity to talk about decentralizing clinical trials. My name is Courtney Mann. I'm in Spring, Texas. I am representing FSR's Women of Color Patient Advocacy Committee. My why, I'm a sarcoidosis warrior. I've been living with sarcoidosis for the last decade, and I want to see better health outcomes for people in my community and for, people that don't know about their disease and need help and need support. So I'm going to use my voice to make sure that I can have better health outcomes for other people in my community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yihenew?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Jordyne, and thank you, NewYorkBIO, for actually inviting me to be a part of this conversation. My name is Yihenew Abetu, and I am the Director of Clinical Research at SUNY Downstate under the SUNY Research Foundation. I work on the site side of things, and I'm very much engaged in the patient recruitment and enrollment and follow-ups of the clinical trial process. And as someone who's highly invested in these processes, I'm very much invested in improving ways of recruiting patients and also making it easy for the patients to be a part of clinical trials. I have been in clinical research for many years, and I actually recently joined SUNY Downstate from Northwell Health, a very large health system. My why is in the pandemic of 2019, we started enrolling clinical trials patients in COVID, and I realized that the patients that we were enrolling really weren't the ones that were highly affected by the disease itself. And I think I started thinking right then, where can I be where the patients are, where I need to sort of make a difference. And that's why I decided to join SUNY Downstate. And it's been a short period, but it's been a really fulfilling one. And I'm happy here representing SUNY Downstate in this conversation.
Thank you all. Thank you for your vulnerability and your transparency and sharing your why. I think that any time that we talk, especially when we're talking patients, we have to get really real and real honest about why we do this. I think that grounds us in the work that we do together. So I thank you and I honor you for sharing those parts of yourself with us. So I want to jump into my first question, and I always like to ground the room, right? I think we have a lot of conversations about decentralized trials or DCTs, OPPs, PSOPs, all types of acronyms. But before we do use any of those, I would love to just ask the panelists, for those listening who aren't as familiar, if they haven't participated in a trial, they're not familiar with the industry or with how clinical research works, can you tell me what is a decentralized trial? And please jump in. Alicia, would you like to start?
I'll start, yeah. So decentralization, I mean, if you look at it from a formal definition perspective, and again, being an engineer, I like the definitions. Decentralization is just simply taking, providing an experience outside of just the site. So you're moving workflow and processes outside of the typical clinical research setup, which is very site oriented. So decentralization can mean anything from having patients participating in a clinical research by wearing a sensor. So they're not on the site while data is actually being collected. It's also it incorporates things like home health visits. So if you need blood work or some sort of specimen collected as part of the clinical research, you can do that collection now in some cases at home. And so it's just really, it's expanding the ecosystem of where the clinical trial itself can actually take place. And decentralization is just another way of looking at the delivery of services and support for a clinical trial that goes beyond the site.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? All right, Alicia, your engineering skills, you covered it all. Thank you for that. So one thing I would love to hear about, Erica or Yihenew, please share if you can. I know you've worked, Yihenew, I know you worked in the COVID space. Erica, I know that you yourself are a sarcoidosis warrior. Can you describe to me what navigating a clinical trial looks like? So, if I'm just like, hey, I went to the doctor's office, I decided to participate. Erica, can you share a little bit about what that would feel like or look like for me as a patient?
For me as a patient, being in a trial, of course, being like a working mom and raising your kids, it has to be accessible, right? It has to not be have a huge impact on your quality of life. So you want a trial where you can give providers information, but not only talk about your health, but talk about your mental health while you're going through the process. I think ideally you'd be able to weekly touch base with someone and really create a good picture with your data and your actual, empirical experience of how you're doing in the trial and how it's actually progressing for improving your quality of life. That would be the dream clinical trial for a lot of patients.
I love that. I love that. Do you want to add to that? Yeah.
Yes, I think just to add to what Erica says, because she hit it on the head, I think the quality of life is really the key term there. I see clinical trials as being part of a care option for patients who probably don't have other options to take care of themselves. when you're participating in clinical trial, you're not just giving data about yourself, but you're also being followed out by clinicians and nurses and clinical coordinators who are checking up on you, making sure that you are cared for. So a lot of times we think about clinical trials as being a very investigational aspect of the process, but there is a very highly involved, deeper involvement of clinicians in your healthcare and your personal care, like you said, from mental care to to your physical well-being. So I really want to make sure that people understand when we're talking about clinical trials, we're not just drawing your blood and saying, come back in 3 months for another blood draw. We are following up with you throughout that whole process, making sure that you haven't had any events, making sure that you're taking the medications that are prescribed to you. And I think at the end of the day, most clinical trial patients have a better outcome. Even if you end up in a clinical trial that is randomized and you are taking placebo, but that extra effort that is put into taking care of you really would give you a better outcome. So I really look at it more of as a care option for patients, not just the investigational product or investigational of collecting the data that we need for approval at the end of this trial.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for sharing that dream state. I've been on a lot of panels about clinical research, and I want to say this is the first time someone has talked about the mental health aspect and the holistic care of the person that's participating in the trial. And I can't understate how important that is. So thank you all for sharing both the definitions and this broader holistic sense of what the experience could and should look like for us. So what I would love to talk about next is, and I think you've actually touched on this a little bit, why are decentralized trials good for patients and for the broader industry at large? Let's start with Yihenew.
So I am, an advocate of decentralized clinical trials, but I'm also a bit cautious when it comes to decentralizing everything when it comes to clinical trials. I think we have better patient access with DCT. I think we have better retention rates in patients with DCT. But I think we have not also invested enough, especially on the site side, to match up with what the industry or what the tech companies have put out there for clinical trials to be decentralized. What I mean by that is I think it's an incredible opportunity that we have to have access to patients that are in a broader sense of geographically. But at the same time, the sites haven't really put in as much investment in their technology to be able to keep up with that. So in most cases, sponsors would come to you and say, okay, we want to do a hybrid trial, and these are the devices that we want our patients and the sites to use. And if you are anything like me, I get confused when I see a tech that I've never seen before, and it takes me a while to catch up. So I imagine patients would have the same sense of confusion. And for those reasons, I think that there's a lot more work for us to do on the site side to catch up with the industry that is providing these stats. But in overall, talking about decentralized clinical trials, the great thing about it is that we're not limited by our geography, that in enrolling patients into our trials. And it creates an incredible diversity of patients. And I'm not just talking about diversity in population, but in diversity in the type of diseases. Some rare diseases are maybe prominent in the areas of, for example, we've done a clinical trial while I was in Northwell for patients who have an eye disease that affected Japanese patients. And able to get, an area where we live, we didn't have that many of Japanese population. And in able to do that, you have to sort of, go out of your area to get those patients. So in these cases, I think it becomes incredibly useful, and it just takes away the burdensome from the patients having to do so much of the work and being able to come into sites to be able to do these. But I am a really huge advocate of that hybrid approach more than I am just entirely going decentralized.
Anyone else would like to add to that?
I'd like to add to that. I think you add a lot of really great points to this conversation that, historically decentralization has not been it hasn't been a technical issue. We've always had the technology there to be able to allow for the decentralization of clinical trials. But what we've found is it's really about the process or the way that decentralization is actually brought into a site or a sponsor's workflow, from a operational perspective. So patients have been more than willing and ready to participate in clinical research in any form. And I don't think I'm overstating that when I say that the patients have been ready for this kind of opportunity or this way to participate in clinical research. It's really been a function, the limiting factor, if you will, for decentralization has really been about getting the technology installed in a way that makes sense for those that are trying to provide the operations for it. So, I think the pandemic pushed us to the tipping point for, rapidly scaling and adopting this kind of technology. It's always been there. We're just finally, putting the time, energy, and investment into what we need to do to get it to where it should be. And I think we're at a point also in this journey, if you will, where the pandemic, we've learned quite a bit from the pandemic. And I really hope that as we come out of the pandemic, we don't start to roll back to old processes and old behaviors, that we really continue to keep our foot on the gas, so to speak, and really continue to innovate and deliver an optimal patient experience, no matter what's going on in the world around us.
So the one thing I wanted to add to that is that DCTs, they need a PR campaign, because in some of the working class and disadvantaged neighborhoods, they don't know about DCTs. They don't know that that's a care option. And so if they can't readily access their PCPs or can afford their specialists, then clinical trials become a great care option into restoring some type of normalcy when they have a rare disease. So I think not only, we've always had patients that are willing and ready, but we also have patients who are willing and ready and actually need to know that this option exists. And so I think that there needs to be a huge push in the Black community and the Hispanic community and disenfranchised communities, so that people know that there are companies out there that want to help you restore or remap your roadmap to good health.
Thank you all for that. That was such a good, I'm like taking notes and leaning in. I'm glad they can't see my face when y'all are talking, because you might see up my nose. I really, really appreciate what you shared. And of course, my work is in equity and access and community engagement, right? And so as you were speaking, what sparked for me is, I love that we have patients who are willing and ready. I love that we talked about, what are the advantages of decentralized trials, how they can benefit patients from continuity of care to better outcomes altogether. But I think we started to touch a little bit on barriers, right? What that looks like, whether that be systemic barriers, all sorts of barriers that patients may face. And I think it would be, inept of us if we didn't really talk about, while we do have plenty of ready and willing patients, what about patients who are ready and willing but don't have access for various reasons, right? I would love to hear more about what either industry, whether that be pharmaceutical companies or sponsors, CROs, actual sites, actual clinical sites, what can they be doing right now? If you said, hey, I want you to walk away with a list of tips right now of how to improve and expand access in underserved communities, can you all tell me a little bit about what you'd like them to know about what they can be doing to expand that access? Alicia, I see you're already off mute, so you're ready to go.
I think what Erica just said in a nutshell is exactly what needs to be done right now. So everything that we've gone through with the pandemic, there has never been a better time in this industry to start running messaging, a marketing campaign, something about clinical research. You have the general public is talking about clinical trials and clinical research. Basically I hate to use the term mainstream media, but they're talking about it for the first time in a very, very long time. And, you know, there's an opportunity to capitalize on the goodwill, you know, having these conversations. People were already talking about issues around disparity and access, even in the context of the COVID trials. The time is of essence for everybody in this industry to start talking about this stuff and really pushing it forward and talking about some of the historic issues that this industry has faced, and, you know, use this as sort of a reckoning. Use the pandemic as a reckoning that, you know what, we can no longer operate in the ways that we've done in the past. And the time is now for us to really look at clinical research in a different way and start building communities and getting back to, you know, the community anchor. Can clinical research, can sites and sponsors become community anchors for neighborhoods and communities that have historically been left behind, not only in clinical research, but other areas of life? You know, somebody needs to really step up and address some of the issues and inequities that we've had for too long. And if we don't do it now, you're never going to be given a better opportunity to do it. It just, everything is aligned right now to take advantage of us in a good way.
Thank you. Yihenew?
You know, I think Alicia really put it really well in there. I mean, she spoke quite eloquently about it, and I second everything that she said. The one thing I'll add to that would be that, you know, we can't just have that patient-only approach. I think we can always go to patients and say, trust us to be a part of the trial. And that may be quite challenging when, you know, you have this historically, you know, challenging history that comes along with it. So one of the initiatives that we've started at SUNY Downstate is, you know, patients trust their doctors. But the problem that we've also noticed is that even the doctors, the clinicians that are by the bedsides are not fully aware of clinical trials themselves. Not only are they not aware, but even if they are not fully trained on clinical trial processes to be able to do clinical trials. So the initiative, what began with senior leadership at the moment that we're sort of ironing out to make it a little bit better than what it is at the moment, is that we want to be able to train our physicians, our, you know, physicians that look a lot like our patient population to be able to be certified, you know, clinical trial, you know, investigators, to be able to bring the news out to, you know, to our patients. And I think if you start from there, by educating physicians, I think automatically that will trickle down to the patients and they'll have a better understanding. There was a figure that I saw, I think from 2008, where it says about 94-95% of patients have never heard of clinical trial being a possibility for their care while they're in hospitals. And I think that is something that really needs to change. You know, just putting it in front of them and say, this is an option for you to be able to take care of yourself. So I really push more also on the investigator side to be trained and to also for investigators to look a lot like the population they serve so that the trust is kind of rebuilt, I guess. So that's my take.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I could not agree more. So I would love to ask, you know, I know we talked about barriers, and Erica, I'll start with you on this one, and then we'll go back around. Is there a challenge relative to digital health literacy that that decentralized trials pose? I know we talked about various barriers, but in the sense that we talk about technological literacy, digital health literacy, do those pose any challenges to decentralized trials?
Of course, with all things, there's an equity. And with tech, there's inequity. And if you are not tech savvy, but you're looking for this as a health choice, a choice for better health, and your PCP or your specialist they're not rooted in knowing about trials and telling their patients about trials, that's like a double whammy. So you have two barriers. And then if you have tech that's intimidating, you don't have someone to actually walk you through it. So you're gravitating towards this choice. But if you don't have anyone to kind of translate it to you so where you're comfortable and you can fully participate, then it's another barrier as well, because now you're engaging in tech that you're not fully comfortable with. So your outcomes may not be the best because you still have some type of intrepidation from using it. So I think we really have to think about clinical trials and tech as a partnership. And I say this comically, we need to form Avengers. It's the patient, it's the PCP, it's the clinician, it's everybody on the team to get good data to make sure the patient has good health outcomes. You have to do it, it's teamwork, but we really have to start to take those blinders off. As Alicia said, it is a reckoning. We know that we need to make things equitable. We know that we need to leverage tech, but we also realize that we need to keep focus that the patient is not a data point, it's a human being. And once we all kind of, form Avengers and roll together, I think it will be so much better. Like Alicia said, we need to be more community anchored in our approach.
I love that. I'm sitting with an image of the Avengers and this healthcare team in my head right now. And I love that because it lends itself to a follow-up question for me. Is there a push to have more input from frontline staff, whether that be the nurses, the doctors, the coordinators, when creating the trial? I think you've already hit the nail on the head in regards to how important it is once the trial has begun and we have a patient in it, that holistic Avengers care team. Do you think that there's any incentivizing or any pushes now to bring those same folks in on the creation of the trial side? And I open this up to anyone.
Yeah, I'll start on this. This is a great question, and I think this is an element of change management that's been overlooked for too long. So you've got the way that this whole ecosystem is set up. The sponsor comes up with the trial, the site sort of operationalizes it for them and actually executes the trial dynamics for them. And I think for too long, there hasn't been enough of a communication loop with all of the players, all the stakeholders in this process. Sometimes we focus on one more than other. And to me, it's like the perfect analogy akin to whack-a-mole. That game where you hit one, you're able to knock down one little thing, and then all of a sudden they pop up everywhere else. And I feel like sometimes that's the approach we take to, we're going to fix something in this ecosystem, we whack the heck out of it, fix it, and then realize, we've created like 17 other problems. So this is again an opportune moment to really look at all of the players, all of the stakeholders, and say, what, our ultimate goal is delivering the ideal patient experience. What do we collectively need to do together in a collaborative way that's going to make this the best experience, the most supportive experience for the patient? And when we start to change our mindset to think of it, from individual pieces in this ecosystem to a true collaborative, I think that's where you've got the opportunity to start really making some fundamental changes. And for too long, I think site staff has really been left in the dark, and that they've got very valid feedback and opinions on the processes that are sort of given to them. And they're the ones dealing with patients and these different activities that need to occur in the context of a clinical trial. What a better place to start than right with them. What do we need to do to support the site staff that will ultimately make a path for them to provide a better experience for patients? So that's how at Medidata, I'm trying to get us our teams to start thinking in that way. You know, if our ultimate goal is to change the patient experience, what do each of us need to do individually and then collectively to make this a true, comprehensive, collaborative change for the better?
Just to add to Alicia there, I think this is one of the most important questions when you're doing a clinical trial on a site level. It really makes a difference, having the engagement and involvement of the clinicians and the nurse staff to be a part of the clinical trial, because it really, that data point that you're looking for is more often than not is missed if the nurses that are by the bedside or in the procedure room that are collecting you the data are not a part of the clinical trial, getting you what you need. So it's really the life of the clinical trial itself really depends on having all the stakeholders being a part of it and making it, a determination if this is even a significantly possible trial to be a part of. We have taken on trials in the past where we think we can do it, but we don't have the staff to be able to conduct it. We don't have the technicians who need to be on the ground doing the work itself. We don't have their blessings, so we find ourselves in a big roadblock at the end of the day in being able to conduct the trials and being able to recruit the patients. And plus, it's also a patient safety issue. The more you involve the clinicians, the more you involve the nursing team, the safer your patients are going to be, because they'll know what to look for, any adverse events, any reaction to the placebo or the drug that you're giving. So it is incredibly important to have the whole team as a unit be able to be part of the clinical trial and actually have their input as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. As you're talking, of course, I'm thinking about this at the site level. I know we've talked about sites a bit, but I'd like to zoom in a little bit on that site level experience. Do you think that there's any financial competitive pressures that would limit the willingness of sites to allow distribution or decentralization?
I think it's more of the technology in sites is so far behind from what investigators or pharmaceutical companies can provide. Sometimes it's not aligned with the level of the team being able to conduct a trial as with the type of data that you need. So financially, there needs to be a significant investment in getting sites to be ready for a decentralized clinical trial. If you are training the team to be a part of a clinical trial and giving them the devices to be able to capture those data, on the site level, that takes time, that takes training, but that needs to be something that should be incorporated into the site's technology rather than something new that is coming on board. And there's an issue of trust and being able to use new devices. I don't know if you ever worked in a company with the IT job is to always say no to everything that you bring on. So there's just quite a few challenges, not just in the financial aspects of it, but more of a security issue as well. Being able to transmit patient data, being able to capture data on devices that are foreign to the site, that could be quite challenging, and you will need to go through hoops and being able to get those approved by your IT team.
I would say what's sticking out to me for sure is that question of nuance, right? Is that it's not an easy fix. It's clearly not a one size fits all solution, and it's really critical that we understand the nuances of the site experience, of the patient experience, of the clinician or physician experience here. Alicia, did you want to add on to that last point on the technology?
Yeah, so I guess one thing I want to point out is when we first started talking about the concept of decentralization and everything. This industry is like an all or nothing proposition, right? Everybody started talking about decentralization and they're like, great, trials are going to be 100% virtual all the time going forward. And that's never going to be the case. If anything, sites have an opportunity now to really invest in different kinds of technology and different kind of technical solutions to really provide, I see it as an opportunity to provide best in class patient experience for when patients are on the site. And that we have to start looking at this in differing degrees of implementation and installation instead of, the rush is, as soon as the industry adopts a new buzzword, everybody they're all in on decentralization, and everybody's like, oh, that's the end of the site. And if anything, we're showing in this, the interesting thing about decentralization is we've reiterated the value that the site has in this whole equation. And I think probably people were never thinking that was a possible outcome of the concept of decentralization. If anything, we need to start doubling down on investments in sites, making sure that sites are as efficient and as optimized as possible to support the patients that still will be coming to the site. And the biggest thing that we really even haven't talked about this yet on today's panel, but in some instances, patients don't want decentralization. They want to remain connected to their site or their academic medical center. And I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're delivering the clinical trial experience in a way that makes sense for the patient. Sometimes that means come back, you need to be on site for some of what you need to accomplish in your clinical trials. So we need to make sure that we've got the tools in place that really can support the any patient, anytime, anywhere kind of mentality, and stop, rushing to adopt buzzwords and keywords, thinking it's going to change our whole industry in one way or another. We're not trying to steer the Titanic away from the iceberg here. We're just trying to keep the industry literally afloat in more ways than one, with ultimately the patient at the center of what we're trying to accomplish. The patient experience is at the essence of everything that we need to accomplish here, full stop. And, we need that combination of sponsors, sites, technology to deliver this empathetic patient experience.
I think I would just add that we definitely need someone at the higher level to invest in having multiple sites, right? Not just at the med center, not just, we need to have sites where it is accessible for patients to get to, because you're right, Alicia, sometimes going to the site takes away from all the stress of managing your disease, and you're going to a place where they're focused on you. But if it's hell or hot water to get to that place, we need to really invest in having multiple sites and making those more accessible as well.
Thank you. In the Black church tradition, we say that's a word. And I'm going to say that was several words. I like to bring my whole self to my panel, so I'm going to go ahead and say that. I'm like, praise hands here, because if you're like me, every morning I wake up and I have a to-do list. And so if you're in the audience right now, you should be, scribbling furiously on your to-do list. We have broader and deeper investments in clinical sites so that they can access cutting edge technology to be able to conduct research. We have the public relations campaign. We didn't forget about that, the public campaign to publicize in communities about clinical research. We need to diversify our site locations. So we have sites in places that are accessible to different communities. My to-do list is full. I hope the same for you. If you're a physician on the call, that means you have to go Google clinical research so you can talk to your patients about it. Listen, I'm putting everyone to work. So my job today is after this summit, everyone get to work, because, we have a lot of work to do. And if you're in the audience now and you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get them answered. I always love to ask a magic wand question, because Erica started us off on this path of a dream in the beginning of this conversation. And I think dreams really activate us. It gives us life to keep going. If you had a magic wand right now and you could shift or change anything in the clinical research landscape, what would that be? And I'm going to ask each of you to answer that in 1 minute or less while the audience prompts their questions. Feel free to jump in if you're ripping and running and ready.
I
Erica.
think if I waved my magic wand, I would have a system or a way for the clinician and the tech to talk to the doctor, to talk to the patient. Maybe have a round robin. It could be in the app where they just have a chat, but for everyone to know that there's a human being creating the data that you need to make a better outcome. That would be a great magic wand, wish to start off with.
I think Erica kind of stole my dream there, but I echo her. I think we need to understand that behind each data point there is a patient. There is a human being. There's a mother. There's a child. There's a father and brother and sister. And I think as people who are professionals in clinical trial, we need to understand that we are affecting people's lives. We need to make sure that as we move forward with this decentralized clinical trial, that we're not losing the vision that we're taking care of patients. And I think that's really what I want to hit home.
Yeah, I think, I guess my magic wand, I think that if we could get the industry to start thinking about the idea that patients are people too, like we sometimes talk about patients as in like third person. And I think that sometimes we forget that, these are real people with real lives that are, and sometimes going through some really critical care journeys. And that if there's a way to just get back that sort of community, collaborative, supportive nature that I think that somehow society has stepped away from. I know you said dream big, so I'm I'm dreaming big. I would love to get to a point where we're more empathetic and caring toward each other. And I think that this is an industry that can really manifest that in ways that we never thought were possible. So maybe the industry just needs a big group hug, but I think we're getting there. So I'm going to keep dreaming.
I love that. I think dreams sustain us, so I'm all for that. Someone said their magic wand is the integration of all vendors involved with clinical trials and better communication and standardization, which I see head nods and we all agree with. We have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to do some rapid fire questions because I really want to get to these great questions from the audience. For Erica, for a patient who's intimidated by a clinical trial, what advice would you give them in 30 seconds or less?
I would tell them to talk to their PCP, talk to their support group. If they have a support group, ask if anyone else has gone through this trial or, interfaced with this tech. That can help you so you know that you're not alone.
Perfect. You were faster than I can get off mute. Alicia, the difficulty of funding a trial leaves little room for adding resources, some of the ones on my to-do list. Do you see partners carrying some of the cost of this expansion?
Great question. And I think absolutely. I think, one of the things that we're going to have to figure out as an industry is, I think the pay model or the cost model has to be shared. I think there's no reason why we can't look, when we're talking about innovative solutions, there's no reason why we can't address the concept of financing or, paying for some of these resources in a new way. So, that's something that I think that, to me, that's sort of the black box of this industry is, it's just usually sponsors are underwriting a lot of this. Is there ways that we can do this in a different delivery way? Are there different things that we can look at? Are there ways that we can integrate clinical research with primary care or healthcare overall that allows for some sort of shared value model? I think that's really going to be the next area where innovation is going to have to come get pulled through. That we can't continue to try to build new models and use old payment structures or old financing structures. So the whole industry, top to bottom, we've got to look for new ways about these problems, thinking through these things.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we have one very specific question, and I'm going to ask it in a little bit of a different way. Someone is working on bringing more exposure of clinical trials in ophthalmology, and in particular, rare eye disease. And they would like to know if anyone here can speak to that area or can follow up in a one-on-one. But since we're at 1 minute, I'm going to ask, would you be open, panelists, to following up in a one-on-one? I think Yihenew, I'm going to ping you if that's all right. All right, perfect. Not to put you on the spot, but you're on the spot.
I'm on the spot.
So I want to get us out of here on time, and I want to just take a minute to extend my gratitude to this group of panelists. As you can see, the passion is personal. I think, the hope for clinical research for decentralized trials is personal to each and every one of these panelists, and I think that passion has demonstrated itself through and through in each one of your comments. And I want to thank the audience for just being here with us in community to learn, to listen, to engage. And my last wrap-up question before we head out in 10 seconds, Yihenew, can you answer this? How do we educate providers not practicing in smaller health systems that do not do trials to learn about participation opportunities for their patients?
I think it's important that they see it as a care option rather than a trial, and engagement in clinical trial, and then in their communities as well. There are a lot of people who need options that they don't have at the moment, and this could be one for them. So be engaged, have the conversation, help your patients.
Perfect. Thank you. Beautiful note to wrap us up on. Thank you for letting me take that less than 30-second extra time. Thank you all for joining us on this panel. I wish you a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your summit.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining us for NewYorkBIO's Patient Engagement Summit, and to the patients, partners, and sponsors that help make this event possible. Please visit our website at www.newyorkbio.org and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter for more.